As you know, the purpose of our campaign is not to get elected. These were the first words I heard during my interview for a political campaign. And the only thing I knew, of course, was that I was confused. So when my interviewer told me this, I was so caught off guard, I almost responded with, then why am I here? For some context, I was interviewing to be an intern for the Madeleine Hoffman Green Party campaign for governor of New Jersey. And what brought me to this interesting moment was my absolute rage for the same trite, two-party, repetitive discourse that was happening on my TV screen, especially when that same limited discourse appeared at my family's dinner parties as fun and casual conversation. And although I'm lucky enough to have been included in these conversations that people my age normally get shooed away from, my tipping point was when I found myself feeding into the same narrow mindset I absolutely despised. When my immigrant father, who has paid taxes for 20 years, feeds into black and white arguments about policy, it's a little hard to blame him. But when our political system had me, someone who can't even vote yet, restricting my thinking to what the US population would accept or allow, I knew I had to get some new exposure as soon as possible. I'd always been aware of third parties, although it was mainly through the discontent that people had for them. But after a conversation with a fellow student, I found this amazing opportunity to work on a campaign that ran on the basis of strong environmental action. Even better, the campaign was primarily student-led, and even my interviewer was a college student himself. It was the perfect escape from the adult dinner parties. Of course, it felt a little less perfect when I found out that no one on the campaign cared about the election. And I want to emphasize that I'm not naive, so I knew that this candidate had an extremely low chance of winning, specifically a 2% chance, when looking at election trends from 1990 to now. However, I still expected some determination or hope rather than dejection from the beginning. However, what I later learned, and what leads me to making the argument I'll make today, is that it wasn't despair they felt. Third parties simply have a different purpose. And if I had to sum up that objective in one sentence, I would say that it's young people working with unique parties to create new politics. Or at least that's what I think it should be. Essentially, the purpose of these campaigns is not to get elected, but to ensure that the major party candidates who do have the best chance of getting elected will acknowledge the issues that third parties propose. And I know it might seem unimportant, or at least it felt like that to me when I thought I was joining a campaign to get a candidate elected. But it really can alter the course of the political stage. To think about it simply, you can't get someone to change what they're thinking if they're always arguing against the same opponent or the same ideas. Similarly, how are you going to get these major party candidates to change what they're thinking if they're always arguing against the same party? When you introduce the unique perspectives that third parties have, you can drastically alter the course of the arguments during the election cycle and make a significant impact. However, right now, these third parties are so hidden that their ability to fulfill this important purpose is drastically reduced. And believe it or not, these third parties aren't hidden because we want them gone. In fact, according to a poll done by the CBS and New York Times, 2/3 of Americans actually prefer having a third party alongside the Republicans and the Democrats. The problem arises, however, when you see that 3/5 of those same people also believe that third parties won't make a difference if they're given more recognition. Of course, that's what I'm here to disprove. As I worked on the campaign, I learned more about the issues that were keeping these third parties in the dark. And if we want to end this never-ending revolving cycle of third parties being ineffective, we have to address two important issues: name recognition and money. The first thing I want to do is truly visualize the scope of our knowledge about third parties. I'm going to name a couple of third party or independent candidates that ran for election in the 2020 presidential race. And just raise your hand if you've heard of them or if you knew that they were running. Joe Jorgensen from the Libertarian Party. Howie Hawkins from the Green Party. Rocky De La Fuente from the Alliance Party. And finally, Kanye West from the Birthday Party. That's great, I kind of predicted that answer, but let's be honest, we definitely have an issue here, where candidates, unless they're rich musicians, aren't really getting the word out about their campaigns. Although Kanye might have just tweeted to let everyone know that he was running, what most other campaigns have to do is publicity and advertising. getting posters out, making campaign ads, talking to voters. I mean, if you've ever seen one of those campaign ads for your YouTube videos, you know what I'm talking about. But that leads to the most pertinent problem currently plaguing all campaigns: money, or more specifically, their lack of it. You need to have money to advertise, but of course, fundraising for these campaigns presents its own host of issues. And the first one I want to talk about today is corporations, whose funds make up the majority of electoral funds. Specifically, in the 2020 election, 88% of electoral finances were donated by major corporations. But these companies donate so that when a candidate is elected, they won't enforce policy that hinders the company's processes. For example, Energy Transit Partners poured $13.9 million into Republican campaigns to ensure that their pipeline, the Dakota Access Pipeline, wouldn't be threatened by Biden. With third parties, if they're not going to win, these corporations don't see a true reason to donate to their campaign, and third parties effectively lose the largest source of funding in all of politics. Now, the next step, naturally, would be to fund from constituents and voters, and this is where I came in. On the campaign, as a voter research analyst, I was tasked with managing phone banking and reaching out to voters to ask them for votes, donations, and overall support. Now, I'd already worked on a Democratic campaign with the same role, so I assumed that my experience would be the same. Ironically, I'd forgotten that it costs money to make money, and if I couldn't use any of these expensive softwares, I would have to have a bunch of volunteers willing to sit and dial hundreds of numbers to talk to voters. And when money is already running low, the extent of your staff is a couple of high school and college students who are stretched thin. So I had reached this standstill where I had all the resources and was ready to go, but I couldn't implement them because of a lack of funds, people, power, you name it. I guess I should have expected this, and I think a lot of people on the campaign already had, but they didn't seem as torn up about it as I was. And that's because phone banking isn't really the way that any third party can complete their purpose. Shocker, I know. But I'm not saying they're unimportant, I'm just saying that their impact is a bit unexpected. They're not just important because they allow us to connect to the voter directly, but they actually help us fulfill a different step that's the most fundamental step to changing politics in the way that we need to. Because phone banking is what's going to get these campaigns to the debate stage. In New Jersey, for a candidate to be present at a major debate, they must reach a specific fundraising threshold of $490,000. Now, it seems small in the grand scheme of things, but to a smaller campaign, it means everything. This roadblock not only prevented my candidate from reaching the debate stage, but also the two other major third-party candidates in the state, Greg Mealy from the Libertarian Party and Joanne Kuniansky from the Socialist Workers' Party. Now, I want to clarify that this doesn't mean they can't have their own debate. It simply means that they can't be in one with the major parties. And I know you're wondering, why is this important? They can still debate, and I thought so too. But as people on the campaign kept discussing the issue with this policy, I decided to do a bit of my own research. Essentially, it all ties back to what I was told in my interview. This threshold creates a monetary value on democracy that does everything it can to limit a diversity of voices in the political process. Since the purpose of these campaigns is to shift the major parties' ideas, the best way to do that is on the debate stage. Debates give a true insight into how a candidate thinks, and it's one of the largest factors that a voter considers when deciding who to support. The vulnerability and quick thinking that candidates must engage in gives third parties the perfect opportunity to propose ideas that challenge the major party representatives and forces them to consider ideas they hadn't realized garnered popular support. More importantly, these third-party candidates can help us stop the current trend of political debates where everyone's just screaming and yelling all the time. I mean, this is an actual picture taken from the 2020 presidential debates. Now, to truly understand what these third parties can do if they're given the recognition I'm talking about, I want to talk about some past examples. In the 1900s, the populists, a third party at the time, they championed for fair labor hours and 40-hour work weeks, which eventually led to FDR passing the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. Just 20 years ago from now, Ralph Nader of the Green Party made a significant dent in the election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. You might know this as that extremely close presidential race that had to be decided by the Supreme Court. But I think it's important that we understand one of the reasons why this happened. Ralph Nader gained 2 million votes, which was no small feat for a third-party presidential candidate. And after Gore lost, it became clear that Nader's very persistence to get on the debate stage as a third-place contender took votes from the Democratic candidate and contributed to his loss. Now, Nader didn't make it to the debate stage, but by championing against the rules so effectively, he tied himself to discussions of the debate and took votes from Gore. Even more specifically, since Nader and Gore both ran on platforms of environmental legislation, Gore's ideas fell flat to what Nader proposed, and without a significant pivot in his campaign, he couldn't make up for the votes that Nader had taken from him. So yes, these third-party candidates really can make the major parties fight harder than they'd previously thought, but only if they're given the right resources. And although it might seem closer than the populists, this was 20 years ago, and we all know how much has changed in the past 2 decades. Right now, we just do not have the same amount of information about third parties to allow them to be effective. So the question remains, how are we going to get back to the point where we're allowing healthy political discourse between more than just 2 opinions? And to that question, I propose the solution: us. High school and college students who are fresh in the political process and can contribute to politics in a way that doesn't bring along years-old biases. We have new and unique perspectives, and like I already mentioned, are widely welcomed and accepted to work on these smaller campaigns. Eager for experience and a bit more willing to work unpaid internships, we have become masses and can help stop these understaffing issues on the campaign. More importantly, we have issues that don't tend to make it to the major parties because we're not the demographic that they primarily cater to. But somewhere out there, some independent or third-party campaign is running on a platform that values the one thing you care the most about. For me, that was the environment and the Green Party, but there's no limit to the groups out there. If you want a more diverse political stage where we move past the winner takes it all mentality dominating these politicians' platforms, all it takes is mobilizing our youth and getting more third parties out there. Now, I know that seems intense, but it simply boils down to supporting one party and helping to remove the roadblocks that hinder their campaign. Phone bank for the campaign and convince voters why they should vote. Petition your local government to change the requirements for the debate stage. And most importantly, create a force that threatens the major parties to consider your ideas and voice your concerns. And in the end, if you're ever considering whether it was worth it, you'll know that it's all paid off when sitting through those dinner parties doesn't feel like listening to the same overplayed song on the radio every day. Trust me, it's worth it. Thank you.